There'll be tangible things in here, actual strategies or tools that teachers that are listening can be like, oh, so that could maybe work for that student of mine. Because I'm sure that anyone listening can picture that student that they're like, doesn't matter what I do, I just can't get them to engage.
The things that engage me are the things that I can relate to into my everyday life. So when we're focusing on a learning and there's a case study to back, I can mentally vision how it can apply to the real world. And that real world examples put so much buy-in for me.
You may be intentionally putting effort into meeting the core psychological needs, and yet something still isn't clicking. So there's a few things to acknowledge here. First of all, it's not like that young person hasn't woken up and decided to walk into your classroom and go, I'm going to piss you off by not caring. But it's not personal. It is a reflection of what is happening in that young person. Podclass acknowledges the traditional and true custodians of the land we meet on here today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We're grateful to be here.
So no one told you teaching was gonna be this way. Your lesson plans are jokes, your patience broke, you're feeling in disarray. It's like you're always stuck in report writing, when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your school year. But I'll be here for you.
When the students start to riot,
I'll be here for you.
even if your coffee's gone cold,
I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.
good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Time zones are a thing. We are Podclass. My name is Will. I'm here with my friends Sky and Amanda.
Hello.
Skizzles and Man.
I really feel like I need to pound the couch.
Sorry.
We have Wilson, Skizzles, and Man on the mic.
On the mic, and this is the one about the student that doesn't care.
This is a big topic, right? Because this is also one of the most common things that we either hear anecdotally, we might suggest strategies or we'll have conversations about what works and what doesn't work for students. And always there's that educator or that facilitator or that youth worker that's yeah, but what about that one kid that just doesn't matter what you do, they just seem to not care.
And I reflected pretty recently. Someone asked me what was my experience in school. It wasn't I didn't not like it, but I didn't like it. It was just I didn't care.
You're
So this was you.
Yeah, I was.
You were the
literally
student
me.
that didn't care.
And whether it was in school or facilitating a program, I know some of our listeners do that. It's I would never put up my hand. I would never engage.
Yeah.
And there were certain elements that just frustrated me about it so much because I was as a person who has always been hyper productive, just felt like this was an unproductive use of time.
That's so interesting.
As in school felt like an unproductive use of your time.
School, but there's also moments where I was so invested in what I was learning.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, we have to unpack this before we delve into what we're going to be talking about with strategies for this student. So if you could articulate and kind of try to isolate, what was the difference? So some areas of school felt like an unproductive waste of your time and you didn't care, and other areas you felt invested.
And this is as someone who's fiercely passionate about education and
Exactly.
learning.
Yeah.
Love everything
Because I'm
that
sure
school could offer me, right?
Because I'm sure there'll be tangible things in here, right? Actual strategies or tools or whatever it might be that teachers that are listening can be like, oh, so that could maybe work for that student of mine. Because I'm sure that anyone listening can picture that student that was probably like you, Will, in school, that they're doesn't matter what I do, I just can't get them to engage. But you were engaged at some points.
So what
why?
was it?
The things that engage me are the things that I can relate to into my everyday life. So when we're focusing on a learning and there's a case study to back it, for example, or we're experiencing it through an activity, and I can almost physically or emotionally or mentally, maybe not emotionally, we're not getting emotional, but I can mentally vision how it can apply to the real world, and that real world examples or that real world application of the learning put so much buy-in for me.
Okay.
Which I mean, and I would say, having been in education for over 10 years, that this is a really active part of what teachers do or try to do in the classroom.
I agree.
It's part of, we talk about it, whether it's in staff meetings or whatever it is. It's how do we make this more relevant? How do we make this meaningful to the students' learning experience so it's not just a standard science lesson or humanities lesson or whatever it might be? So what was it that was is it because it aligned with your passion areas, like your interests?
Or is it because it challenged you in the right way?
I think when we often speak about optimal challenge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was that, and it was always almost that autonomy as well. Them two things that like you could actually explore them a little bit further.
Hang on, sorry team. Can I just clarify? Did we just ascertain that for you, when you were brought in, it was when you had relatedness, competence, and autonomy?
And what is this?
The 3 core psychological needs. Is that what I think that's what just happened.
And I think that's like what motivated me as a student as well. But it's like very rare that I felt them moments in the classroom as well.
And I think you make a really good point, because I feel like often we try and do like one of those 3 things as teachers, and we're not necessarily aware of how all 3 of them really need to be working in conjunction with each other. Like we'll either offer students choice, like we're doing this activity today or this activity. Great, there's a sense of autonomy. Or we pitch something that's like that optimal challenge. It's not too hard, it's not too easy, it's a bit of a stretch kind of goal. Or it's like really connected to their experience in the real world, and that's that relatedness piece. But very rarely do we maybe package or intentionally package all 3 of those things. And if I were to hazard a guess, what I think is that your schooling experience, when you had those moments where you completely were like so tuned in and so engaged, was when actually all 3 were being met at the same time.
And I think the flip side of that is often when they don't exist and the young people are disengaged, they're often labeled as lazy. They're often labeled as the disruptive students. Yeah. And that's maybe that's why I didn't care as well, because I was being labeled with them things.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting, right? is that, like, I mean, let's be clear. If you call a young person lazy, like you might be like, oh, Will, I've noticed that maybe your work's been a little bit lazy lately, or you've been a bit lazy, and you're like, that student is never going to turn around and be like, oh, you know what, Mrs. Hughes, you're
right.
So right.
I am just so lazy today. So yeah, I better just kick my butt into gear and get on with it. Thanks so much for that hot tip.
Oh my gosh. To your point, you say like maybe you were fully engaged and actually on fire in class when all 3 core psychological needs were present, and then you made a reference to when they're not there. And it's really interesting that in some circumstances, they won't be being met, but what we most often see is they're either being met or they're being thwarted versus just not being present in like a neutral space in the middle.
Does a neutral space exist?
I think it can exist, but it is like it's just like minimal thwart or minimal meet, right?
And I think the neutral happens when there isn't intention behind it. When it's just, and I mean, I used to joke all the time about my 3-step lesson plan, which was the 3 steps as I was walking into the classroom. And I know that sounds funny, but in hindsight, they weren't my best lessons. I could get away with it, absolutely, especially after you've kind of got through your first few years of teaching and you feel like you're out of the trenches a little bit in terms of overwhelm of knowledge and curriculum and how to run a classroom, et cetera. But I definitely know that when I actually took the time to actively think about how to implement those psychological needs, it changed so much about how the classroom looked.
Yeah.
And I think that is with like everything as well, like the way that we show up for our work, the way that we show up in our lives, the way that we show up in our personal lives. We often don't take the time to actually strategize how do we implement these core psychological needs into the things that we love as well.
And if we were going to maybe kind of step out some strategies for the student that doesn't care, for your Will Massara in your classroom, it might be you may be intentionally putting effort into meeting the core psychological needs, and yet something still isn't clicking. So there's a few things to acknowledge here. First of all, it's not personal. It's not like that young person hasn't woken up. Your Will Massara hasn't woken up and decided to walk into your classroom and go, I'm going to piss you off by not caring.
But let's also just preface that it can feel like that
100%. But it's not. It can look personal, it can feel personal, but it's not personal. It is a reflection of what is happening in that young person
And I would
or in their
also
world.
say, from my experience, if the teacher feels like it's personal, the student also feels like it's personal against them too.
Ooh.
Interesting.
Because I always felt like in these classrooms that I didn't care, the teacher was against me.
So when it feels personal to the teacher, they subconsciously shift their behavior to the student, and then the student feels it, and then we're stuck in this loop.
Yeah.
Which emphasizes the importance of that student-teacher relationship, of finding what we call common ground. So when we can find things that we have
Absolutely.
in common with that person. And I think like often, because we share experiences based on our experiences. So it's what's relevant to us in our world. And I think if we have that student who quote unquote doesn't care in the class, we need to actively think, what is it that is important to this student? And we do a bit of a recce. We invest in building that relationship.
Genuinely.
What are they interested
That's
in? And in an
genuinely.
authentic way, not just like, so what did you do on the weekend
Exactly, 'cause
and
that's
stuff
not
like
normal.
that. And that I think comes with a level of like observation and really tuning in and noticing that student. So maybe noticing who their peers are or who they spend time with at lunchtime, and what we would call like hallway connection, like those moments that aren't in class. Because often in class it can feel like and I know as a teacher, because I've had this feedback from students before, when you connect with them in a classroom environment, the student feels like, well, you're just doing your job. Like it's your job to do this right now because we're in a classroom. But this is why I love school camps. I'm a huge advocate for spending time with
100%.
young people outside of a school environment, for incursions and school workshops, because we get to see and connect with our students in
a
different
different
ways
way.
and build those
Without
relationships.
the
They
pressure
don't-
of curriculum.
You're not in the role,
Yeah.
and not wearing
Yeah.
the hat of
Exactly.
classroom teacher.
So if you have a student who, again, doesn't care in your classroom, like one of the first things that I would suggest, or that I would do if it was me, would be like, where are the hallway moments that I can connect with this student?
100%.
And that's catching them on their way into school and being like, oh, hey, I didn't know you caught the bus. Do you live, whatever? Or, maybe they're in the canteen line at lunchtime and they also get the spaghetti for lunch, or whatever it is. It can be in those really simple things, but it just shows that you are noticing them and you are making active bids for connection.
Versus what you referenced, Will, which is where teacher takes it personally, teacher subconsciously shifts their behavior to the student feels that. This is the absolute opposite.
Teacher
it's us.
walks past in hallway, does not make eye contact. I
Yeah.
do not make eye contact back.
It's looking
They're like, oh,
No
thank God,
hallway.
I don't have to deal with that student until period 4 today.
Yes.
Literally.
It's looking at our Will Masara and going, okay, this isn't personal. Something's going on. I am the person in the leadership role here, and I'm going to navigate this and do my best. And absolutely, of the 3 core psychological needs, we would start with relatedness.
Yeah.
How can we build relationship, connection, find common ground, and support that young person's sense of belonging versus thwarting that young person's sense of belonging through maybe those subconscious behaviors that we might have had in the past.
And I
Number
think,
2.
oh, yeah, you go.
I was going to go number 2. I think real world scenarios, implementing
Yeah.
them into the classroom. How can you, we've spoken about it before with Jerry and his 12 watermelons. How do we bring that into not every single moment, but how do we make it relatable to their life, the actual content as well?
Yeah.
Because there's step 1, we're relating to them on an individual level. Now step 2 is how do we make our content relatable to their life?
Which is so much easier once we've done that first step, right? Because suddenly we have all this like unofficial data that we can use and implement to actually make it relevant. I love it.
And I think we also need to acknowledge not everything is going to be fully relevant, but what we can do is we can link learnings to life through debrief questions at the end of a session.
Yeah.
Through asking what's something we can take away from this character in this book, or what's something we can learn from unpacking this element of biology. What's something from today
I've
that
got one.
yeah.
You're a mathematician, right?
What? No.
You love math, don't you?
She does love math.
So I
like
did
math.
not like math.
Okay.
But I will forever remember, I think it's trigonometry, I could be wrong, where the size of the triangle.
Trigonometry.
Trigonometry. Perfect. The reason why I remember it so well is because every single time I cut a corner and go directly across, that's what I think about. Like when it's a corner and I go straight across the little.
Is that
diagonal
because
side.
your teacher made it relevant
They
to
made it relevant. They said you want shortcuts, they will always be shorter if you go across the triangle.
Interesting.
Trigonometry, real world scenarios.
I'm so glad that you have that takeaway. School will.
Yeah. Anyway.
Fantastic. I also think it's really important to acknowledge, like in all of this, like empathy is such an important part. And I think it's really easy to get frustrated with the student that doesn't care and consistently dismiss them. And being like, oh, well, that's their choice. They don't want to buy in. That's on them. I've got another, 25 students in the class that need my attention and my focus, right? And yes, while that's true, it's also our responsibility to make that time to connect. And I think if we can come from an empathetic perspective, be curious about what's going on for that young person and being really careful of not buying into the labels. Because I know that we stopped at a school I've recently worked at. we stopped doing like really, really intensive handover notes at the end of each year to the next cohort. It was only really like the need to know things, because otherwise you run the risk
Preconceived
of
ideas.
transferring a label
100%.
of that student to the next educator that maybe has them in the classroom, as opposed to letting that young person show up in the way that they want to. They come in already being like branded as the student who doesn't care, as the lazy student, as the student who's always late, as the student who's unprepared.
Well, that comes directly back to that study that was done in the States, where 2 teachers were employed and they were given their class lists, and one teacher was given a class list of A+ students, high performing, best in the school, and another teacher was giving a student list of, you know, it's our lower cohort, they don't really show up. And they went in and they delivered to the expectation of their students. What the teachers did not know is that the lists had been swapped. So the teacher who thought they had the A+ class actually had the lower class. The teacher who thought they had the lower class actually had the A+ class. Because of the teacher expectations, what happened in real world practice was the class that had been the lowest skyrocketed in their commitment, in their grades, in how they showed up. The class that had been the A+ class plummeted. And that was all grounded in the teacher's expectations and how they showed up. Like, it is wild. It plays such a role. So I think it's something to check ourselves for, because we all, as humans, we are wired to make things make sense. So we see a young person and we feel like they don't care. It looks like they don't care. We write a story in our head, but we have to catch those moments. We have to catch those stories, and we have to go, no, this isn't personal. What does this young person need? How do I build relatedness? Do I just lean in and go, oh, it seems like you need a bit of space. Do you need 5 minutes? I'll come back in 5 minutes. And then in 5 minutes time, let's talk about what we're working on today.
I have
Give
one
it a go.
final strategy,
Yeah.
and we've spoken about it time and time again, but it's student voice. How do we implement that in the smallest moments in
Are
our
you like a
classroom?
student voice advocate or
don't-
something?
listen to
Have you got
listen to
some
one of
kind
the
of
other
business
episodes,
that does something with young people?
I reflect
don't
on a
know.
program not that long ago that we delivered with 100 young people, and we felt like by the first, it was probably halfway through, that they weren't buying in. So we gave everyone a sticky note, and on one side they wrote more, and the other side they wrote less. What do you want more of, and what do you want less of?
Love.
And we got that back, and we literally we changed the way that we were delivering for the rest of the day, and the buy-in and the engagement went through the roof.
Amazing.
That's
How
like
cool is that?
the minor small things that maybe you're doing it at
You
the
know
end
what
of a
that
week.
is? That's Post-it notes changing lives.
Oh, absolutely. I'm
Right
the number one
there.
consumer of Post-it notes in Australia, us 3 here.
Once again, post it. Some of you looking to sponsor anything.
Love it. So I think if we're taking away something from this episode, is that if you have a young Will Masara in your classroom and it might look like and sound like they don't care, young people all have a sense of self and all care, and it's not personal. What we need to do is show empathy, get curious, build relatedness, meet those core psychological needs, and we get really conscious about how we've been showing up as well in the relationship.
I think it's important because most people, when they listen to the podcast now, would expect me to be like an A-grade student in school, or when they see you.
I've never once thought that about you. No, just kidding.
We pretty much, of course you don't. But like the expectation of like a leadership academy, like is often an academically performing student who sits in that position.
Yeah.
However, I was the student that was labeled that doesn't care. I had enough power to not let that label stay. However, a lot of young people don't have that same power or that same support system. And if they're stuck with that label, they will never reach their full potential.
So important.
So important.
So check our biases, check where we have maybe labeled and made judgment on a student that maybe is unfair and uncalled for, and allow, and I think this is an important teaching philosophy, life philosophy in general, let that young person show up the way that they want to, the way that they need to in that moment, and let go of previous interactions, previous ideas of who that person is. Because if we carry that into every interaction, that's not setting that student up for success.
And please, if you give it one go and it doesn't work, don't stop.
Guess what? We care about you, but see you soon.
we care about you, but that's the most
Guess what?
Australian thing ever.
We care about you, but
But this
see
is
you
the
next
end.
week.
Bye.
Bye.
I'll be here.
'cause you're there for them too.
Thanks so much for tuning into Podclass. If you've enjoyed this episode, we would adore it if you could go on to Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a review. 5 stars would be lovely. We would love to get this podcast into as many ears as possible so we can help and support as many people as possible who help young people. And if you're not already doing so, please go along to Instagram and follow us at podclass.aus.